I have said repeatedly that I refuse to condemn Hamas in the same way as my own country's abolitionists, those who oppose slavery, they refuse to condemn the largest and bloodiest slave rebellion led by Nat Turner.
Mainstream media discussions about Gaza constantly rely on a single, dishonest euphemism, that what we are watching is simply a war that has gone disproportionate. They want you to believe that Israeli military forces are pursuing a standard defensive campaign, but simply overreaching by accident. But when scholar Norman Finkelstein appeared on Piers Morgan Uncensored alongside conservative Israeli historian Benny Morris, he completely shattered that narrative. Finkelstein pointed out a crucial truth that Western pundits refuse to touch. If a government's explicitly stated goal is mass displacement and the destruction of a society, then total devastation isn't a mistake. It is completely proportionate to that goal. If you believe in standing against media sanitization and demanding truth over access, hit that subscribe button right now. I'm Neil. This is The Honest Perspective. Mainstream media calls it collateral damage. The official statements of Israeli leaders call it a strategy. Let's get into it.
The two issues, as I see it, between us, if you allow me, and you can, of course, disagree with me because I'm interpreting you, the two issues between us are, number one, the allocation of moral responsibility. I have said repeatedly that I refuse to condemn Hamas in the same way as my own country's abolitionists, those who oppose slavery, they refuse to condemn the largest and bloodiest slave rebellion led by Nat Turner. On the contrary, they said, speaking to white society, they said, we warned you, we warned you, we warned you. If you treat people this way, if you dehumanize them, if you exploit them, if you kill them, don't be surprised if at some point there will be a bloody, and they acknowledged, ugly slave rebellion. That is also my position on Gaza. That's number one.
Notice what Finkelstein is doing here. He refuses to allow the host to trap him in a superficial soundbite. By invoking Nat Turner's 1831 slave rebellion, he forces the audience to confront a historical reality. Anti-slavery abolitionists did not condone the brutal violence of a slave uprising, but they held white slaveholding society morally responsible for creating the conditions of extreme repression that made an explosive outbreak inevitable. It's a refusal to analyze an explosion in a vacuum while ignoring the pressure cooker.
The second place where I believe we disagree, and here I consider it a significant disagreement, just as the first one is significant, where we secondly disagree is on your terminology. You describe what Israel has done as being disproportionate. You describe what Israel has done as being over the top. Those are your expressions. But in fact, what Israel has done is very proportionate. It's proportionate to its goal. Its goal is to achieve an ethnic cleansing by use of genocidal means. If that's your means, then what Israel has executed is proportionate. It's not over the top. It would be over the top or disproportionate if it were a war, if you were trying to inflict a military defeat on the opposing army. But that's not what's happening in Gaza. That's not what's happened since October 8th. The prime minister was very straightforward. He said, remember Amalek. Kill every man, woman, child, and other things. Or President Herzog, there are no civilians in Gaza. Or Defense Minister Gallant, we're going to prohibit all food, fuel, water, and electricity from entering Gaza.
This is pure nonsense.
That's a formula.
Pure nonsense.
That's a formula for
Pure
genocide.
nonsense.
Okay. This is the central breakdown of the entire debate. When Piers Morgan and Western anchors use words like over the top or disproportionate, they assume the objective is conventional warfare. Finkelstein reads back the actual words of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu referencing Amalek, President Isaac Herzog declaring no civilians are innocent, and Defense Minister Yoav Gallant ordering a total siege on food, water, and power. The violence is not an accident. It is the execution of a stated policy.
Well, let's start with the basics. I usually start with international law. And you'll forgive me if it sounds pedantic. And as international law has become more and more marginalized, fewer and fewer people are believing in it, but I still believe in its basic precepts. In July 2025, the International Court of Justice, the supreme legal body in the world, ruled that Israel's occupation of Gaza, Israel's occupation of the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and Gaza, are illegal under international law, and Israel has to leave as quickly, as rapidly as possible. That's the first precept for me, or foundation stone for me. The ICJ,
Hamas
the highest...
disarming. He asked you about Hamas disarming.
Sir, Mr. Morris, this is not the West
You're not
Bank.
answering his question.
You have to carry on in a civilized fashion. Very difficult for you, but try. Okay? Thank you. So, the bottom line is Israel has no title to any of Gaza. Number two, under international law, there is no prohibition on a people using armed force to expel an occupying power. There is no prohibition on that. Number three, it's odd that we should discuss Hamas having to disarm. Hamas committed a crime of significant magnitude on October 7th. Israel executed a genocide in Gaza, and it continues in its aim of trying to expel the entire population. So why is it that Hamas has to disarm itself, but Israel, the genocidal state, also the state that has breached the prime precept of international law by launching an aggression, a brazen, flagrant aggression, the most brazen, the most flagrant in the modern world against Iran? Why are we talking about Hamas having to disarm?
What makes Finkelstein's argument in that final segment so lethal to the standard television news narrative is that he anchors it directly in international legal precedent. When Piers Morgan asks about the logistics of Hamas disarming, Finkelstein redirects the core premise back to the highest legal authority on the planet, the International Court of Justice. In July 2024, the ICJ rendered its landmark advisory opinion on the legal consequences arising from Israel's policies and practices in the occupied Palestinian territory. The World Court ruled by an overwhelming majority that Israel's decades-long occupation of Gaza and the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, is entirely unlawful under international law. The court declared that Israel is under a strict legal obligation to bring an end to its presence in the occupied territory as rapidly as possible, to immediately cease all new settlement activity, and to dismantle existing settlements. Furthermore, under basic principles of international law, an occupying power that maintains an unlawful regime of control does not hold a legal right to claim self-defense against the population it forcibly occupies to preserve that illegal occupation. Yet, in Western television studios, the framing is routinely inverted. The occupied population, living under a blockade deemed illegal by international courts, is demanded to disarm, while the occupying power is granted total diplomatic immunity, billions in military hardware, and continuous rhetorical cover. Let's look directly at the receipts Finkelstein cited regarding Israeli leadership rhetoric. When Defense Minister Yoav Gallant announced on October 9, 2023, that Israel was putting a complete siege on Gaza, stating verbatim, "There will be no electricity, no food, no fuel, everything is closed. We are fighting human animals and we are acting accordingly." That was not a rogue soldier blowing off steam. That was official state policy communicated from the top of the defense establishment. When President Isaac Herzog stated during a press conference that it is an entire nation out there that is responsible and that the concept of uninvolved civilians in Gaza is not true, he was explicitly erasing the legal distinction between combatants and civilians. This is why the word disproportionate is a dangerous distraction. Disproportionate implies that the military objective was legitimate, but the math on artillery shells was slightly off. But Article 2 of the 1948 UN Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide defines genocide not merely as manual executions, but as deliberately inflicting on a group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. Cutting off water, blocking medical aid, destroying agricultural land, bombing hospitals, and systematically displacing 2 million people into expanding safe zones that are subsequently bombed. That is the literal legal text of inflicting conditions calculated to bring about physical destruction. Conservative historians like Benny Morris try to argue on television that unless troops are lining people up against a wall and shooting them one by one, it cannot be called genocide. But modern international humanitarian law was written specifically so that states could not circumvent the Genocide Convention simply by using siege warfare, starvation, and mass aerial bombardment instead of firing squads. When you strip away the polished media graphics and the polite framing of cable news, the reality becomes undeniable. The debate isn't about whether a military campaign went slightly too far. It's about an illegal occupation executing explicit political goals on a captive population, while mainstream networks pretend not to understand what the official quotes mean. If you believe in cutting through corporate news fluff, looking at the actual legal receipts, and holding power accountable, subscribe to The Honest Perspective. I'm Neil. Truth over access, every single time. That's The Honest Perspective. And that's where I'll leave you.